It's hard to follow that powerful, incredibly powerful letter, which was sewn into her undershirt. And Yocheved said she'll tell you the rest of what happens. But we have an assignment. We have homework for you here before we can get back on the bus and make our way to Krakow. And I want to just give you an introduction to the assignment and leave enough time for you to do it. We come here in the forest, we hear that 8,000 are buried in mass graves here, 800 children in the spot in which we stand. And relative to other places we've been and will be tomorrow, 8,000, it's almost impossible to say this, is a negligible number. Treblinka, 900,000, Auschwitz, million. The number 8,000 seems small relative to some of the other places. Saul was commenting to me as we walked in, the attack on the World Trade Center killed 3,000 people. Devastating, horrific, unimaginable in America. $100 million memorial was built. The world is turned upside down. New York City all focuses on it. And it's a third of the tragedy of this one spot hidden in the forest, in this one location that we're in, to give it a sense of perspective. Being here is personal for me. We walked through Tarnow, Michael Michel, and the privilege of hearing his father's story, his childhood there. We thank God was able to get out. Michael and Liz commented that perhaps we're standing at the mass grave of children who his father played with in his youth, who didn't have that fortune. But my father's father had family in Tarnow as well. My great-grandfather and my great-uncles, and to this day we don't know what happened to them. My father said that his father mentioned, a cousin had said their yurtzeit is in ER 1942, but the circumstances, the place of the death, we don't know. And what we learned and heard from Dr. Bernstein means that there's a great chance that they may be buried right here. It's significant because it's my family. It's especially significant because it's my name. The Umschlagplatz in Warsaw, we saw the wall of names. We challenged you to find your name. My Hebrew name is Ephraim Chaim. I'm named for those great uncles who we don't know where they're buried. I bear their name and the responsibility of being their monument, of being their matzeva. And being here therefore takes on an extra special level of meaning. When Moshe and the Jewish people leave Egypt, they take the bones of Yosef, fulfilling the promise. They won't leave him buried there in that place, a place that tortured the Jews, that oppressed the Jews, that persecuted the Jews. Yosef, anticipating, said, I don't want to be here. Make me a promise, you'll take me with you. And Moshe fulfills that promise, carrying the bones of Yosef himself through the Yam Suf, to be buried ultimately in Shechem, in Eretz Yisrael, in the land and the state of Israel. And the Pasuk tells us that Moshe carried Vayikach es atzmos Yosef imo. He took the bones of Yosef together with him. And the Yiturei Torah says, read it, not atzmos Yosef. He didn't take the bones, he took the atzmus Yosef, the essence of Yosef. Who Yosef was, what he stood for. His ability to live in a foreign land and maintain his Torah true values, his capacity to be a link in the chain of a Masorah, a transmit our sacred tradition. Yosef HaTzadik, who endured the great enticement of the wife of Potiphar. Moshe took not only the bones of Yosef, but the atzmus, the essence of Yosef with him, because it was Yosef who would help mold and shape Moshe and the Jewish people when they got to the other side. We have a responsibility at mass graves like this, in all our stops here in this place, Poland, like Mitzrayim, that does not have a great legacy to our people, and to take atzmos, to take the bones of our ancestors, not literally and certainly not of those who don't have a resting place in a matzeva, but their atzmus, who they were and what they stood for, the values they lived by, the lifestyles they've led, and the great sacrifice they made. and many of the survivors, the sacrifice they made to give us the life that we have. Tell you a story and give you your assignment. Many of us here knew Rabbi Levine, Rav Shmuel Levine, from our community's mother, Mrs. Levine, Zechrona Levracha. She was an amazing woman of tremendous modesty, of great humility, of profound faith, of incredible courage. She was a throwback to another generation and another time. And when she visited Rabbi Levine in our community, you had contact with another world just by being in her presence, let alone talking to her. She was just a little girl when the Nazis rose to power, when they conquered Poland. And as she and her family were being rounded up for deportation, her father noticed that she was wearing earrings he had given to her. And quickly, in a hurried fashion, he said to her, "Take out those earrings. Because the Nazis, if they see them, are going to tear them from your ears. You won't have them anyway, and all you'll have is the incredible pain and wound of earrings being torn from your ears." They were already literally on the way out of the house. And with no idea of where else to put them, she took out the earrings and threw them under the steps of the front porch of her childhood home. Mrs. Levine survived the war. And after being liberated from the camp with no idea where to go, she returned back to that childhood home. We spoke about this earlier several times. She knocked on the door and she explained to the Polish stranger who answered, "This was my home. We were deported and taken from it. These are my belongings. I've come back." And the hostile resident of the home screamed at her, slammed the door in her face, and told her to get lost. And she described that at that moment, having survived the greatest atrocity, having lost her family, somehow finding the strength and courage to endure, but then, just then, the final slap in the face. She sat down on the steps of the porch with her head in her hands, sobbing, not knowing what to do next, where to go, or how she could continue. And then it hit her. She suddenly remembered the earrings. She put her hand under the step behind her, felt around, and quickly found one of those earrings. She realized she wanted the other one desperately, and it took a lot longer. She tried to be quiet, not to attract the attention of the neighbors, of the person of the house. But after several minutes, she was able to find the second earring. Mrs. Levine wore those earrings the rest of her life. Almost always, whatever jewelry she had, it was those earrings that she wore almost every day the rest of her life, because that was the atzmus. Those earrings were the gift of her parents, were the message of her father, were her connection to her past. She took it with her. We, please God, will never be in the position of the woman whose letter Yocheved read, that had to pin it to the undershirt of a 2-year-old daughter with the hope she could one day read it. We have the privilege of writing and communicating and transmitting to our children, not under threat. For a long time, Jews didn't only take care of their estate planning in the form of how to avoid giving the most to Uncle Sam, how to give it out equitably, how to give it out halachically. But for a long time, Jews wrote a tzavah. They wrote an ethical will. My dear children, these are the values I lived by. This is what I want you to know. These are my hopes and my dreams for you. This is what I want you to take from my life. When I meet a family planning their loved one's funeral, every time I ask that question at the end, they tell me their whole history, and then I say, if your parent were here right now and I can ask them, what do they hope you took from their life? How do they want to be remembered? What values do they wish you emulate? What would they say? Sometimes families answer right away, glowingly, it's clear as day, and other times they sit and say, you know, I've never really thought about that. What a crime, what a shame to not leave a clear communication. So our homework to you right now is to take your journal. Two of the pages in the back you'll see says, letter to children and grandchildren. To find a step, to find a place to sit, to take a few moments, and to write that letter. A letter you may choose to deliver to them now, you may put away someday for them to read later, or maybe you don't ever share, but it helps you communicate and coordinate your thoughts. But what has this trip inspired in us? What does Judaism mean to us? What are the values that we live by? What do we care about? What are the dreams and aspirations we have for our children? What matters most to us in their lives? Our children and grandchildren. When they look back and take our atzmos, when they take our bones after our final resting place, what will be our atzmos? What is the essence in us we want them to know and we want them to emulate? In this place, standing around this mass grave of 800 children who didn't get to grow up and fulfill the dreams of their parents, let us who are so privileged not miss the opportunity to communicate what matters to us. Not just to give earrings they can wear the rest of their life, but to give values they can aspire to. So please find a spot by yourself to think, to write, and in a few minutes we'll gather around again to light candles. Michael will certainly light his family here in Tarnow. I'll light, commemorate my namesakes, Ephraim and Chaim, who may just be here. And others who want to light, we have several candles. We'll say a Kel Malay, and we'll conclude with Kaddish before we go back to Krakow. So please take a few minutes with your journal or writing on your phone, however you'd like to record it.